Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. I am sharing my 10 cards using Love From Lizi's February 2019 card kit. Now this card kit is already sold out, but there are add-ons available and I will provide links in the description box for those. So my video is going up just a little bit later than normal since I was away at Creativation for several days back in January. But I did finally receive my kit and I was so excited to get playing with it. Okay, let's get started. This is card number 1. I'm using Freshly Made Sketches number 311. I'm using some of this lovely teal cardstock for the background, and then the pattern paper is one of the 6x6 papers. And then I'm using just some black cardstock to mat everything, but instead of matting the pattern paper, I used some of the sparkly glitter peel-offs instead. And then I decided to use this lovely peacock image that is included on the stamp set. So it's this really nice, very detailed image. So I wanted to emboss it. I'm also using one of Love From Lizi's new embossing powders. It is the sparkling brilliant blue color and it's just beautiful. It has little pieces of glitter in there. So first I went and treated my paper with a little bit of the anti-static powder, then use some Versamark ink, and then now I'm just putting down all of that beautiful embossing powder, and you can just see all that sparkle. Isn't that lovely? So now I'll go ahead and get my pink heat gun. And you can just see some of that just coming to life. It's just so beautiful. Lizi actually released 6 new embossing powders last month, and a few of them have the real pretty glitter on them. So now that that is all dry and set, I just trimmed it down a little bit and I'm matting it on some black cardstock. And I do have a little scallop circle cut out of the back of that because I will be using that later on in this card. So I'll go ahead and get that placed on my card front. And then there is that scallop black circle. And then I also cut out a little stitch circle using that same background paper. And if I thought about it before, I would have cut it out before, like using that piece on the background. That way I wouldn't have to cut a new piece, but I didn't. So I just stamped one of the sentiments that's on the stamp set. This is a great one. It's probably one I'll use the most just because it's always a good sentiment to have on hand. And then I'll just add a few of the sequins, just a little bit toward the top, around the sentiment, and then some toward the bottom. And I'm using this jewel picker tool that I recently purchased, and Lizi actually sells them in the shop as well, so I will add a link in the description for that. It makes picking up all of those little sequins and little pieces so much easier. So that was card number 1. Now on to card number 2. This sketch is Freshly Made Sketches number 373. Now this sketch is one I would probably normally use toward the end of the papers when I have all of these little thin strips left over, but I had this idea and so I decided to go ahead and do it as my second card. So I just cut some real thin strips. These are about 1/2 inch in width, just on several of the 6x6 papers, and just put those 3 in the middle. And then just to add a little bit of separation, I'm using some of these lovely gold holographic peel-offs. So these are brand new to the shop and they are beautiful. So I just put all of those between all of the little strips, and then I'm going to go ahead and use one of these cut aparts. So this came on the full 12x12 sheet. So I went and used an oval die and cut out just the sentiment part out of there, and then used another oval die that was just a little bit bigger and left the gap. And then I'm putting a piece of this mirror gold paper, so this came in the kit, just behind there. So now there'll be that little frame of the gold cardstock in between. And then I'm also going to go ahead and pop up that sentiment oval just with some thin foam squares, just to add that little bit of dimension and definition between the two ovals. And the gold color of that mirror paper matched really nicely with the gold holographic peel-offs. So once I got all of those little backers on the dimension off, I'll go ahead and put that card front onto a card base. And then just a final little touch, I decided to use some of these gold gems that came in the kit. And I'm just putting them in the 4 outer corners of that little sentiment cut apart. So that is card number 2. So now I'm on to card number 3. The sketch is number 43 by Freshly Made Sketches. And if you are interested in any of the sketches with the measurements, I do include all of those on my coordinating blog post, and that link is in the description box. I chose this floral sticker that comes on the 12 by 12 sheet, and then instead of using cardstock to mat that sticker, I'm using some of the teal peel-offs. And I did want to mention, I found it really fun that I had a nail polish color already that perfectly matched the teal peel-offs that come in the kit. So that was super fun. For that smaller rectangular piece, this is some of the mint green pearlescent paper. And then for the background where the sentiment's going to be, this is actually the back side of one of the 12 by 12 papers. I used some of the blue cardstock and cut out this beautiful intricate die that comes in the kit. So it's super thin, and so when you do cut it out, you want to be very careful. And I did use some wax paper. That way it was easier to get that paper back out of the die, because otherwise it kind of gets stuck in there and it could rip very easily. So I decided I wanted to put back some of these little cutout pieces. I wanted to inlay them back into the die. So I just used a few of them. I'm just using some liquid adhesive and kind of putting them back together like a puzzle. And I did notice that like the triangles on the opposite ends don't all match perfectly, so you do want to make sure you get them in the right side. So then I wanted to add just a little more detail, even though it already had a ton of detail, but I used another one of the dies. It's like the little corner die, and I cut that out using some of the gold specialty paper. And then for the sentiment, I'm using that Just Because again, and I'm going to emboss it. And so this time I'm using one of the older embossing colors. I believe this is the royal gold color. So I was trying to decide if I wanted blue or gold, and I decided to go with the gold. And it didn't match the gold specialty paper exactly, but I thought it was pretty close. So let's go ahead and heat emboss that. I love the shine that you get from all of the embossing. And since it was heat embossed, it does make the paper curl up just a little bit, so I did use a little extra adhesive on there. Now go ahead and put my card front onto a card base before I add any other embellishments. And so I'm just going to put those 2 little gold corner frames just kind of on the edge of the sentiment. So it's kind of framing it even more. And I did notice like the little prongs on this die, they do bend quite easily, so I wanted to make sure to lay them nice and straight when I was gluing them down. So now just a final little embellishment. I'm using a couple more of the gold gems that are included in the kit, and then a few more on the bottom of the card. I like to add like 3 embellishments in the corner of some of my cards. So that is card number 3. Now on to card number 4. For the background paper, this is some of the specialty add-on paper. This is the satin, and it's one of the greens. And I used the embossing folders, and I just love the detail you get with this specialty paper and the embossing folders. And so I'm pulling out some of this black glitter peel-offs again and just putting them on the side of the specialty paper. The black glitter peel-offs are definitely one of my favorite colors. And so I'm just trimming a little bit of the cardstock off of each side. It was a little wider than I wanted it to be. And then I'll go ahead and put that card front onto a card base before I really get started with this card. So I used some of the black pearlescent paper to cut this little strip for the lower part of my card. And now I'm going to play with some of these feathers and these little pearl sprigs that come in the kit. So I've never used this kind of embellishment on my card before. This is definitely not my normal style, but it was so much fun. So I'm using some of the skinny black ribbon and just tying them all together, getting them nice and snug, and then just putting a little bow on there. And then I did trim off some of those extra little real feathery pieces toward the bottom. And you'll see though some of them do fall off, so I kind of have them decorating my workspace once in a while here. So then I decided to add some more of the black glitter peel-offs just to the top and bottom of the black specialty paper. And then I'll adhere that to my card front using lots of adhesive since it's going on top of an embossed background. And then I'm just going to stamp the Add a Girl sentiment just on some white cardstock. And then I'll just cut a little banner on the one side of it. And then I'll mat that on some black cardstock. And then the left-hand side is going to be tucked underneath the feathers. But I do want to pop up the right-hand side just a little bit, so I used a few of the real thin foam dimensional squares. So you can see some of the little feather pieces keep falling off on me. So I was trying to figure out the best way to make sure these feathers are going to stay on my card. So I did use a couple of glue dots, and then I also pulled out some of the multimedia mat and just put a bunch of it behind where I knew it wasn't really going to pop through or show through on the card, and that seemed to hold it in place really well. So I am using my ATG gun just to hold it there, and it was there longer than that half second. I did pause the video at one point. So now just some final embellishments. I'm going to use a few of the sequins and just put 3 of them in that upper right hand corner. I'm just trying to decide which colors would look best and using a few of the different sizes. So again, I pulled out the Ranger Multimedia Matte Adhesive and just putting those sequins in place. So this card is so fun. I love how fluffy it is. So that is card number 4. Now on to card number 5. I'm using Mojo Monday sketch number 412. I have 2 different pattern papers from the 6x6 paper. I used more of a muted tone on tone for the background, and then a little busier design for this strip that's going to go across the middle of the card. And then I did align that piece with some of the teal peel-offs. And then I used one of these embossed specialty papers. This is one you can buy individually as an add-on, and I cut a stitch circle die and put that in the back of the card, kind of behind that strip. I love the detail on the embossed paper. So now I went ahead and cut out one of the squares, and this is on the 12x12 paper. It has a whole bunch of these different colored squares with the little embellishment around or decoration around the square. Some of them have sentiments in them, and there's a lot of them that are blank. So I cut out one so I could add my own sentiment. And so I'm using some of the add-ons. There's these foam gold stickers and then some of these layered chipboard stickers. So I'm just keeping it a general sentiment, adding a little flower in that upper corner. And since there's a little bit of dimension with that sentiment box, I just put a small piece of dimension on the one side of that flower so it wasn't sagging down. And then I used a few of these little gold stars, and I just want to make sure they stay in place. So I do use extra adhesive even though they are already self-adhesive. And then for a finishing touch on this card, I pulled out the Nuvo Drops, and this is the Sunlit Meadow, this beautiful glittery green color. I'm just putting some small circles all around that die cut circle. A few on the bottom as well. Then when it dries, it'll just have this beautiful little hint of glitter on there. Then I just did a few more around the sentiment as well. So that is card number 5. Next is card number 6. So I pulled out the wooden veneer feather, and I'm going to ink it up just with some blue ink using one of the little distress foam tools. Take a little bit on the edge and then just on the front. And I got my fingers nice and messy doing this. And I wanted just a little extra shine to there, so I am putting on just like a clear shimmer spray. So I'm just going to spritz that on. You can tell I usually use a gold spray. So then I'll get started on the sketch. So this is MFT sketch number 247. So the background paper is just that teal cardstock again. And then I'm using this lovely feather stamp. And so I'm going to just stamp it all over the card or the cardstock using some Versamark ink. And I had thought about just leaving it just like that because it still leaves just like that nice hint of the design. But then I decided to go ahead and put some embossing powder on there. So this is the Glossy Clear embossing powder, and it's one of the new ones. And I really like it because it adds just a lot of shine without any extra color. So you'll see that as soon as I start heat embossing it, just the lovely shine that's suddenly there. I mean, it really matches, kind of brings out the background paper already. So isn't that just beautiful? I love all these feathers on the background. So I already went ahead and cut out just a stitched frame, although you don't see the stitched on this paper, but it's a stitched rectangle frame using some of the specialty paper that's part of the add-ons. This is a black glitter. And since this whole piece was heat embossed, it always does curl up a little, and I want to make sure it lays nice and flat. So I did use some 1-inch score tape to adhere that in place. That way I know it'll stay nicely. So I did notice that my card base was just a little bit wider than that card front, so I just went ahead and trimmed that off because I can't stand it when even just that sliver of white shows through. And this glitter paper is really nice because it doesn't shed. You might get like a couple little flakes of glitter when you cut it, but overall it doesn't really make a mess. So I'm using some more of these chipboard stickers, and now I pulled out the blue feather that I decorated. I'm going to adhere those to that strip on the bottom using just some of the multimedia matte. I've noticed that regular ATG doesn't seem to hold things very well on glittered paper. Even though I use this darker blue ink for the feather versus that teal background paper, I think that sentiment sticker really helped kind of combine them all together. And then just to kind of tie in that gold from the sentiment, I decided to use some of the specialty gold paper for that banner in the upper corner. And yes, I used my ATG to hold everything in place while the glue dried. And then just to add a little extra detail, I'm using just the really small teal sequins that come in the pack. So just kind of randomly putting them all around on the feathers in the background. Even though I didn't use any pattern papers on this card, I love how it turned out. With all of the little extras, it has a lot of shine and sparkle, and I think it would be perfect for a teenage girl. So that is card number 6. Now on to card number 7. So I'm using one of my favorite sketches. This is number 218 from Operation Right Home. So their sketches are always fun because measurements are always included. I really like this large almost a square, it's more of a rectangle shape that you can put just like a favorite pattern paper to really feature that on the card. So I saved this really pretty peacock feather paper just for something like this. So I just added a few of the teal peel-offs to this striped paper, and now I can go ahead and put that lovely peacock feather paper on there. I'll put that card front onto a card base. And then overall this card is fairly simple, and they did stick almost exactly to the sketch. So I'm using the With Love a Sentiment, just stamping that on some white cardstock, cutting the little banner on the side. And then I just used the dark blue cardstock that comes in the kit for all of the layers, although I did run out. And since I always have a ton of cardstock on hand, I actually had another blue that matched this perfectly, so that was great. So I'm just going to pop up that sentiment with some foam dimensional tape. And then I'm just using the gold gems for those 3 little circle spots, little elements on the sketch. And again, those are self-adhesive, but I do like to use a little extra liquid adhesive just to make sure it stays put. And then I added just a little gold banner in that upper right hand corner. And then I decided, a little last minute touch, I didn't like the little white space next to the With Love sentiment, so I'm just using some of the teal peel-offs and putting 3 little strips just to the right hand side of it. So this would have been so much easier to do before I adhered everything down, because I could have tucked the ends underneath, but I made it work. And so that is card number 7. So now I'm on to card number 8. This is Freshly Made Sketches number 229. So for the background, I'm using some of the specialty paper. This is that mint green pearlescent paper, and I went ahead and used the embossing folder. Love the detail on this, very pretty. So for that thin strip on the sketch, I'm using 2 of the skinny ribbons. So one is a teal and then one is the black. So to adhere those in place, I just put a 1/4 inch strip of score tape, and then I'm just kind of putting them side by side. And then just tuck the ends behind, and I'll use another piece of score tape to adhere those down. And then I've already gone ahead and cut out the pattern paper in these 1.5 inch squares, along with the black paper for matting. So I do have, it's hard to see in the video, but I did mat this embossed paper on some blue cardstock first and then onto some black cardstock. So now I'm just gonna lay out all of those squares following the pattern on the sketch. So I'm trying to make sure they're straight and that there's like an equal distance between all of them. So I'm just gonna put that card front onto a card base. And for this card, I did decide to leave just that thin white border of the card base. So for my sentiment, this is one of the stickers that comes on that 12 by 12 sheet. It says Something Splendid, and I did want it to pop just a little bit, so I am putting it on some of the black cardstock and just cutting out a thin matted layer. So then I'm trying to figure out where I want to put it on the card. So I'm moving it in all these different spots, and I ended up putting it exactly where I placed it at the first spot. So then just a little extra embellishments. I'm just going to use some of the sequins. So I used a variety of colors and sizes this time. Did 3 little sequins in the upper left hand corner, and then just 2 in the lower right hand corner. And then I decided I need just a little more sparkle, so I pulled out the glitter Nouveau drops and just put it in the center of kind of like the flowers on that pattern paper. So that is card number 8. Now on to card number 9. This is MFT sketch number 420. So I'm using this lovely floral background paper. And then for all of these strips that go on the lower part of the card, this is just some more of that mint green pearlescent paper. And then to just kind of give them a little bit of definition, I'm using some more of the teal peel-offs. And I'm just using one of the thinnest peel-offs on each of the pearlescent papers. And it's nice to leave them overhanging just a little bit, and then you can just tuck them underneath, and then there's no worries about them peeling up off of the card, even though I've never had any of the peel-offs come off of a card before. So just go ahead and put that card front onto a card base. And then for my sentiment, I wanted to use this really lovely, intricate frame stamp. So I'm just using some black ink to stamp that, and then I'll be putting a sentiment in the center of it later. But for the sentiment, I decided I wanted to emboss it. So I'm going to clean off my stamp and then get another stamp. So I'm using the With Love again. And so using a little bit of the anti-static powder, some of my Versamark ink. And I usually like to ink it up a few times to make sure I have a good impression. And then the embossing powder is just the Brilliant Blue. So this isn't the sparkling one this time. So I'll just go ahead and get my heat gun. And I love the blue in here. It matches with the pattern paper really well. So then I decided I'm going to fussy cut this whole stamped image out. So I did speed this part up quite a bit because I went a little bit slower than I normally would, just because it has all these little corners and edges to go around. So just leaving a thin white border around, and then I decided it was like too white against the pattern papers. So I'm just going to add some gold shimmer spray to it. Just that way it's not so stark white looking on the card. So I'll just lay that aside, let that dry for a few minutes, and then I decided to use some of the add-on brads that I picked up. I'm just going to use 2 of the blue pearls, just putting them in that upper left-hand corner. And the tool I'm using, this is by We Are Memory Keepers. It's just a brad setter and paper piercer. So it saves your fingernail so you don't have to push those little prongs down. So I'll go ahead and put that card front onto a card base, and whenever I have brads, I do put a little extra adhesive behind the back of the brad. So now that that gold shimmer spray is mostly dry, I noticed when I was putting some adhesive on the back, a little bit of it came off on my black cardstock. So I just want to add some black cardstock to matte that sentiment just so it stands out just a little bit more on my card, and it goes well with the black cardstock for the background of the card. So again, I'm just fussy cutting this, and I sped it up quite a bit, just leaving a real thin edge. I didn't want it too bold. And so I'm going to just use some foam dimensional tape to pop that up. So overall, this is a fairly simple card as well, but I like all the extra little touches. So that is card number 9. Alright, so now I'm on to card number 10. I'm using Mojo Monday sketch number 236. So rather than cut into any more of the full sheets of the pattern paper, I'm just using a few of the leftover scraps. And then for the center, I'm just using some more of that gold. It's an embossed specialty paper. And then I pulled out some more of the black glitter peel-offs, just putting a little divider between the 2 pieces, or the 3 pieces. So it's very helpful if you didn't cut them like perfectly. So I did have like a little gap between them. So you just put a peel-off in there and nobody has to know that it wasn't cut exactly. So what I really wanted to try to do, kind of challenge myself, is to use this deco mesh ribbon. Wasn't sure what to do with it, so I wanted to put it over the middle of that gold paper. I thought it would look really pretty to have that gold kind of shine through. So I was kind of fussing with it, trying to get it to stay in place. So I found it kind of stretched it real tight and adhered it around the back of the cardstock using a piece of score tape. So it does add a little bit of dimension because it kind of pops up slightly. So I decided I'm just gonna put more dimensional tape on the back of this whole piece and then add it to the card front. So it's not quite as thick where the actual mesh comes around, so I used just a little thinner dimensional tape there. So it's going to go ahead and place that down and push it nice and firm. In the front of the card, that mesh does move around a little bit, but it doesn't seem to come off at all. So before I go add anything else, I'm just going to put all of that onto my card base. So then I pulled out the sheet of stickers. So there's this long 12-inch strip with all of these ladies all dressed up. And so I'm just cutting a small piece of it, so it's going to go across kind of the middle of that mesh area. So I went ahead and added some black cardstock just to mat that sticker. And then trying to figure out how I'm going to adhere that in place. So I just got a whole bunch of glue dots. So I'm kind of covering the whole back piece, hoping that that's going to stick really well to hold onto the mesh and like through onto the cardstock. And it worked great. It's not moving at all. So press that nice and firm. And then I used another one of these really delicate dies, kind of like a little border. So I like the little design on there. So I used some more of the gold cardstock, and I'm just putting it right below the little image of all the ladies. And then I pulled out one of the chipboard stickers, and I'm just putting that right on top of that little detailed die cut. And then just for a little banner, I used another one of the stickers, and I just trimmed it down a little bit. And I decided it needed to be matted with some black cardstock just so it showed up a little bit more. And I just put that in the upper right hand corner of the card. And that is my final card, number 10. So now here's just a quick recap of the 10 cards I made using Love From Lizi's February 2019 card kit. And like I said earlier, this kit is already sold out, but there are add-ons still available. So now let me show you everything I have left over from the kit. So I still have a little bit of cardstock, some of the specialty cardstock as well, 3 full sheets of the 6x6 pattern paper, as well as some scraps. And then I still have a full sheet of the 12x12 paper and then some partials of the other 2, lots of the stickers, and I still have that sheet of vinyl, plenty of the peel-offs, and then just a little piece of that mesh ribbon, lots of the skinny ribbon still, a couple more of the little pearls, and some of the sequin mix. I never did get around to using the glitter. I do have more of the gems, one more of the wood veneer feathers, and then a feather. And then of course the Nouveau drops, the dies, and the embossing folder, and then the stamp set. So I still have a lot left that I could make plenty more cards with. So I will put links in the description box to all of the add-on products that are still available. And if you are ever interested in purchasing the Love From Lizi kit, the best way to guarantee a kit is to sign up for the monthly subscription. So I will have links in the description box for that as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.